Join me as I dive into the life of Vladimir Lenin and challenge myself to uncover whether he truly was the revolutionary leader of Russia. Few figures in history have left a legacy as powerful and divisive as Vladimir Lenin. A mastermind of revolution, a relentless political strategist, and the architect of a new socialist era, Lenin's vision not only toppled an empire but also reshaped the world. But was he truly the hero of the working class? Or was his revolution merely the beginning of a new form of oppression? To understand Lenin, we must go beyond the myths and propaganda, peeling back the layers of his life to uncover the man behind the movement. Born into a well-educated family in Simbirsk, young Vladimir Ulyanov was not destined for revolution. Yet tragedy struck when his older brother, Alexander, was executed for plotting to assassinate Tsar Alexander III. This event would change Lenin's life forever, igniting in him a burning hatred for the autocratic regime and setting him on the path to radicalism. He immersed himself in the works of Karl Marx, forming his own vision for a workers' uprising that would dismantle the centuries-old Russian monarchy. Exile, persecution, and years of underground activism shaped Lenin into a relentless revolutionary, unwavering in his pursuit of a new world order. His return to Russia in 1917, aided by Germany in a bid to destabilize the nation, proved to be a turning point in history. With his famous slogans of peace, land, and bread, and all power to the Soviets, he rallied the masses, orchestrating the Bolshevik seizure of power and declaring a new socialist state. But was Lenin's revolution truly for the people? Or did his leadership pave the way for a system as oppressive as the one he sought to overthrow? To answer these questions, we must examine his rise to power, his policies, and the consequences of his rule. Step into history with me as we uncover the real Vladimir Lenin, the visionary, the strategist, the revolutionary icon. Was he the liberator of Russia, or did his legacy cast a shadow over the very ideals he fought for? The truth lies within the revolution itself. Act 1. Early life and ideological formation. Scene 1. A young revolutionary. The story begins in Simbirsk, Russia, in the late 19th century. We explore the childhood of Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, Lenin, focusing on his family background, particularly the influence of his father, Ilya Ulyanov, a school inspector dedicated to education reform, and his mother, Maria Alexandrovna, a highly educated and politically conscious woman. Scenes of family gatherings depict lively discussions about education, justice, and the state of Russian society. Lenin's early academic excellence and keen interest in literature and philosophy are highlighted through his interactions with tutors and local intellectuals. A pivotal moment occurs when Lenin's older brother, Alexander, is arrested and executed for his involvement in a plot to assassinate Tsar Alexander III. This tragedy devastates the family, causing his mother to retreat into mourning while fueling Lenin's growing resentment toward the Russian autocracy. The execution is vividly depicted, with the chilling final letter from Alexander serving as a haunting reminder of the risks of defiance. Young Lenin, once an ambitious law student, now becomes engrossed in radical literature. Through his mother's quiet resilience and the subversive books left behind by his brother, Lenin begins to explore the philosophical underpinnings of rebellion and class struggle. He secretly reads banned works by Chernyshevsky and Marx, and his late-night discussions with close friends foreshadow his eventual role as a revolutionary leader. Scene 2. Education and radicalization. As a student at Kazan University, Lenin quickly immerses himself in political literature, particularly the works of Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and other radical thinkers. He engages in fierce ideological debates with fellow students, dissecting theories on labor, capitalism, and revolution. Scenes of animated debates in university halls and clandestine meetings in dimly lit cafes show Lenin emerging as a formidable and articulate voice among his peers. His sharp intellect and uncompromising stance attract both admiration and suspicion. A dramatic confrontation with a university administrator illustrates his defiance against authoritarian control, as Lenin fearlessly argues for student rights and academic freedom. His involvement in student protests against the university's strict regulations leads to his expulsion, a devastating blow that only strengthens his resolve. He returns home but remains undeterred, transforming his personal library into a sanctuary for self-education. He spends long hours meticulously annotating books, drafting political essays, and corresponding with underground revolutionary groups. A clandestine printing press is introduced, showing how Lenin secretly distributes revolutionary pamphlets, solidifying his role in the movement. His meetings with influential Marxist thinkers refine his ideological beliefs and tactics, preparing him for the next stage of his revolutionary journey. Scene 3. The exile years. Lenin's activities eventually lead to his arrest, and he is sentenced to exile in the remote Siberian village of Shushenskoye. This period, though isolating, proves intellectually formative. Scenes of him pacing in a snow-covered landscape contrast with moments of intense study and political writing. He deepens his understanding of Marxism, engaging in extensive correspondence with revolutionaries across Russia and Europe. His letters, filled with fiery rhetoric and strategic insights, reveal his growing conviction in the necessity of a disciplined vanguard party to lead the revolution. The grueling conditions of exile, harsh winters, limited resources, and constant surveillance serve as a test of his resilience. During this time, Lenin meets and marries Nadezhda Krupskaya, a fellow revolutionary and dedicated Marxist. Their relationship is depicted as one of intellectual partnership and mutual support, with scenes showing them engaged in deep discussions about political strategy and the future of socialism. Despite the harsh conditions of exile, Lenin's determination only grows. We witness him meticulously drafting his first major political works, passionately debating ideology with fellow exiles, and preparing for his eventual return to political activism. One particularly striking scene shows Lenin mapping out the future structure of a revolutionary party, with stacks of books and manuscripts surrounding him. As his exile comes to an end, Lenin emerges stronger and more determined than ever to bring about a socialist revolution. The final moments of this act feature him boarding a train, bound for European exile, staring out the window with steely determination. The echoes of Alexander's execution and the injustices he has witnessed fuel his relentless pursuit of a proletarian uprising, setting the stage for the next chapter in his revolutionary odyssey. Act 2. The Rise of the Bolsheviks. Scene 4. Return to Russia and the 1905 Revolution. The scene opens with Lenin, now back in Russia, standing in a dimly lit apartment in St. Petersburg, surrounded by revolutionary pamphlets and newspapers. The city is buzzing with tension as workers gather in the streets, their voices rising in chants demanding change. Lenin, along with other revolutionaries, engages in clandestine meetings, plotting their role in the growing unrest. He moves from factory to factory, speaking to workers in hushed tones, urging them to take action against their oppressors. The 1905 revolution unfolds in vivid detail. Massive strikes bring factories to a halt, railway lines are blocked, and protesters flood the streets waving red banners. We see Father Gapon leading the peaceful march toward the Winter Palace, where the crowd is met with gunfire from the Tsar's troops. The massacre, later known as Bloody Sunday, horrifies the nation. Lenin watches from a distance, his expression hardening as he witnesses the ruthless suppression. Secret police patrol the streets, arresting suspected revolutionaries, forcing Lenin and his comrades to operate even more cautiously. Despite the revolution's failure, Lenin perceives it as a crucial lesson in the power of mass mobilization. In heated debates with fellow Marxists, he argues for the necessity of a disciplined, centralized party to lead the revolution. The split within the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party intensifies, with Mensheviks advocating for a broad, inclusive party while Lenin pushes for a vanguard of professional revolutionaries. The scene closes with Lenin, standing before a group of devoted Bolsheviks, outlining his vision for a future revolution, his words carrying the weight of inevitability. His voice is resolute. We must be ready. The tide will rise again, and this time, we will lead it to victory. Scene 5. World War I and the February Revolution. The film transitions to 1914, where Europe is engulfed in the flames of World War I. Lenin, now in exile in Switzerland, paces furiously in a small study, his desk cluttered with books and letters from fellow revolutionaries. He denounces the war as a conflict between imperialist powers that sacrifices the working class for the greed of the ruling elite. In impassioned discussions with exiled socialists, He calls for the transformation of the imperialist war into a civil war, urging soldiers to turn their guns against their own oppressors. He delivers fiery speeches in cafes and underground meetings, emphasizing that the proletariat must seize the moment to overthrow their rulers. As the war drags on, the Russian people endure extreme hardship, food shortages, economic collapse, and staggering casualties on the front. The February Revolution of 1917 erupts spontaneously, with women leading massive protests for bread and workers joining in solidarity. Soldiers, initially ordered to suppress the uprising, turn against their officers and mutiny. News of Tsar Nicholas II's abdication reaches Lenin, but his frustration is palpable. He is thousands of miles away, unable to influence events directly. "This is our moment," he mutters to his comrades, "but we must be there to seize it." A tense scene unfolds as Lenin, desperate to return to Russia, negotiates with German authorities for safe passage. The infamous sealed train journey begins, carrying Lenin and his comrades across war-torn Europe. The atmosphere inside the train is filled with hushed conversations and nervous anticipation. Some comrades express doubts, fearing they are being used by the Germans for their own interests, but Lenin remains resolute. As the train pulls into Petrograd's Finland station, Lenin emerges to an electrified crowd, raising his fist and delivering his famous speech. "The war must be turned into a revolution. All power to the Soviets." The crowd erupts in cheers, and the revolution accelerates into its next phase. Scene 6. The October Revolution. Petrograd in October 1917 is a city on the brink of upheaval. The provisional government, led by Alexander Kerensky, struggles to maintain order while the Bolsheviks gain support among workers, soldiers, and sailors. Lenin, now in hiding, disguises himself with a wig and false beard, moving between safe houses as he finalizes plans for an armed uprising. The tension escalates as Bolshevik leaders debate the timing of the insurrection, with some fearing premature action. Lenin insists, "History will not forgive us if we do not seize power now." The night of October 25th is one of nervous energy. The Red Guards, led by Trotsky, methodically take control of key positions, bridges, telegraph offices, and railway stations. The scene intercuts between Trotsky directing operations from the Smolny Institute and the besieged ministers of the provisional government barricading themselves inside the Winter Palace. Workers whisper in the dimly lit streets, awaiting the signal that will change history. The storming of the Winter Palace is depicted as a chaotic but decisive moment. Red Guards and revolutionary sailors advance through the palace corridors, encountering scattered resistance before finally arresting the ministers. The iconic moment arrives as Lenin stands before the Second Congress of Soviets, announcing the overthrow of the provisional government. The hall erupts in cheers as Lenin proclaims the establishment of Soviet power. "We will build a new world, a workers' state," he declares, his voice echoing through the chamber. The scene closes with Lenin stepping onto a balcony, addressing an ecstatic crowd in Petrograd streets. Fireworks illuminate the night sky as workers, soldiers, and peasants celebrate their victory. However, in the shadows, Lenin's expression remains determined. He knows the true struggle has only just begun. The revolution has been won, but the battle for its survival has only begun. Act 3. Establishing Soviet power. Scene 7. The Civil War. The Soviet government, still in its infancy, is immediately besieged by internal and external enemies. The Russian Civil War erupts in a brutal struggle between the Bolshevik Red Army and the counter-revolutionary White forces, backed by foreign powers like Britain, France, Japan, and the United States. The scene opens with the Red Army scrambling to defend key strongholds. Soldiers, many barely trained, engage in fierce battles on the frozen plains and ruined cities of Russia. A young Bolshevik officer, his uniform tattered, rallies exhausted troops for one last charge. Meanwhile, in Petrograd and Moscow, Lenin and Trotsky strategize in dimly lit rooms, poring over maps and telegrams, making split-second decisions that will determine the fate of the revolution. As the war intensifies, we witness the devastating consequences on civilians. Cities are choked with refugees fleeing the violence, food supplies dwindle, and disease spreads unchecked. War communism is enacted, Factories are seized, grain requisitioned from peasants, and private trade is outlawed. Peasant families hide their last sacks of grain from Bolshevik requisition squads, fearing starvation. Some resist, leading to brutal crackdowns. Lenin delivers impassioned speeches to factory workers and Red Army battalions, emphasizing the necessity of sacrifices for the survival of the revolution. Meanwhile, Trotsky, aboard his armored train, moves from front to front, enforcing discipline and rallying troops with fervent oratory. The narrative also explores internal conflicts, factional infighting within the Bolsheviks, the brutal suppression of the Kronstadt rebellion, and growing disillusionment among some revolutionaries. By the war's end, Russia is devastated. Millions are dead, the economy is in ruins, and the country is in chaos. Yet, against all odds, the Bolsheviks emerge victorious. The final shots of the scene depict red banners being raised over smoldering battlefields, signifying the triumph of Soviet power, but at a tremendous human cost. Scene 8. The New Economic Policy. With the guns of the Civil War finally silenced, Lenin faces a harsh reality. Russia lies in ruins, its people exhausted and hungry. Famine grips the land. Industry is paralyzed, and discontent simmers. Even within the Communist Party, frustration mounts over the failures of war communism. Lenin, always a pragmatist, realizes that drastic economic reform is necessary. In a tense meeting of the Central Committee, he proposes the New Economic Policy, NEP, allowing limited private enterprise and small-scale capitalism. Hardline communists are outraged. Heated debates erupt. Some see the NEP as a betrayal of Marxist principles, while others argue it is a necessary retreat to preserve Soviet power. Lenin, unwavering, defends the policy. We must take one step back to take two steps forward. The effects of the NEP unfold in a series of vivid sequences. Markets spring to life. Peasants, once forced to surrender their grain, now freely trade their produce. Small shops reopen, and bustling street vendors hawk goods once scarce. In the countryside, farms recover, and the specter of famine begins to lift. The economy stabilizes, but inequality resurfaces. Wealthy traders, or NEP men, flaunt their success, drawing resentment from hardline communists. Even as Lenin celebrates the policy's successes, he remains wary. He knows this is a temporary compromise, not a permanent solution. Behind closed doors, he warns his closest allies about the ideological dangers ahead, foreshadowing future struggles over the direction of the Soviet state. Scene 9. Legacy and Final Years. As the Soviet Union begins to recover, Lenin's health deteriorates. A series of strokes leaves him weakened, but his mind remains sharp. In his private study, he dictates notes and letters, outlining his vision for the future. He becomes increasingly concerned about the growing power of certain figures within the party, chief among them, Joseph Stalin. Through tense and intimate conversations, Lenin expresses his unease to trusted comrades like Trotsky and Krupskaya. In a pivotal scene, he dictates his now famous testament, warning of Stalin's ruthlessness and urging the party to reconsider his role. Meanwhile, Stalin works behind the scenes, consolidating power, forming alliances, and undercutting rivals. In his final days, Lenin is confined to his estate at Gorky. His interactions with visitors are limited, his speeches reduced to scribbled notes passed through aides. Yet even in silence, his presence looms over the Soviet leadership. The news of his death in January 1924 sends shockwaves across the nation. The final sequence is a solemn, haunting portrayal of his funeral. Thousands gather in Red Square, braving the bitter cold to pay respects. Workers, soldiers, and peasants weep as his body is placed in a temporary mausoleum. Stalin, standing near the casket, delivers an eulogy, but there is an undercurrent of political maneuvering. The camera lingers on his calculating gaze, hinting at the power struggle to come. As the funeral procession moves through Moscow's snowy streets, Lenin's legacy is cemented. His vision has reshaped Russia, but the fate of the revolution now rests in the hands of those he left behind. Conclusion. Discover the life and legacy of Vladimir Lenin, the revolutionary leader who changed the course of Russian history. His radical vision toppled an empire, dismantled centuries of autocratic rule and introduced a new era of socialism that would shape the world for decades. But was his revolution truly a victory for the people, or did it pave the way for an era of political repression and centralized control? This video has explored Lenin's rise to power, from his early days as a passionate Marxist activist to his leadership in overthrowing the provisional government during the October Revolution of 1917. His unwavering belief in a classless society led to the establishment of the Soviet state, but his rule was marked by strict party control, suppression of political opposition, and the formation of a one-party system that would define Soviet governance for the next 7 decades. Lenin's policies, from war communism to the new economic policy, NEP, reflected both his ideological commitment and his pragmatic approach to maintaining power in a war-torn nation. While he promised peace, land, and bread to the masses, his leadership also saw the creation of the Cheka, the Red Terror, and brutal crackdowns on dissent. He envisioned a worker-led utopia, yet his methods often relied on force, propaganda, and political purges. His death in 1924 left behind a legacy that was both celebrated and contested. His embalmed body was placed in Red Square, turning him into a near-mythical figure, yet the Soviet Union he helped create soon evolved into something far beyond his original vision. His successor, Joseph Stalin, expanded on Lenin's centralized power, leading to an era of totalitarian rule, purges, and state-controlled oppression. Even today, Lenin's name evokes strong emotions, admiration from those who see him as a revolutionary hero and condemnation from those who view him as the architect of an oppressive system. His ideas inspired socialist movements worldwide, but they also sparked intense debate over the cost of revolution and the reality of implementing Marxist ideals on a national scale. Join us as we continue to examine the key events, ideas, and controversies surrounding Lenin's life and legacy. Was he a liberator or a dictator? A visionary or an opportunist? Did he truly embody the ideals of the revolution, or did his leadership betray the very people he sought to empower? History is rarely simple, and Lenin's legacy remains one of its most complex and debated. The question remains, was Vladimir Lenin truly the revolutionary leader of Russia? The answer is yours to decide. If you like this video, please like, comment, and consider subscribing to CyberTheo.